So that area, and of course any country, any government, there's institutional dynamics. Any organization has sort of its own agenda on a certain level. But I think in the Japanese system that institutional agenda is much bigger than in other countries, and I think it's very difficult to understand what goes on in the courts in these family cases, and I think other cases as well, without being cognizant of what the court's interest is in the results. And they may not have a particularly strong interest in any given case, but sort of on an ongoing basis, I think they are an interested party.
Mm. So is there any indication that the changes that you're hoping for are going to happen?
I don't know, and I try very hard to not be cynical, but every time I hear a new case, it's that much harder. Mm. I don't know. Change comes very slowly here. And by change, I mean actual change, not change on the surface. It's, and I'm going to say it's very easy to make a new law. Of course, it's an arduous process. But making the law is just the start point. It's actually giving it life in the court system and in a way that people notice is a completely different thing. For example, after World War II, when the United States was occupied by the U.S. military, under the occupation, the Civil Code was amended so that, unlike in the pre-war Civil Code, in the case of divorce, fathers always got custody. Mothers could get custody too. Mothers didn't actually start to get custody until the 1960s. The law was the law, and then something changed. In the 1960s, if you look at the statistics, suddenly there's this, suddenly fathers aren't getting custody and mothers are getting custody all the time. Well, I have asked a number of people why, what happened here, because it wasn't the law that changed. Something changed about, I don't know if it was Japanese society or the court system. One theory is just that's how long it took for judges who had sort of read the new law to get in positions to apply it. It might have been that that was when the generation of people who grew up during and before the war in households where there was only a mother because father was in the military or dead, those people started to make custody decisions, and the only thing they had to work with was their own experience with just a mother. I don't know. But just changing the law doesn't result in change on the ground unless there's some other elements, whether that's social education, attitudes, or getting the courts to act in a different way. I don't know. Getting the courts to act in a different way can be difficult.
So it could be a combination of things like the issue to become big in the media, or people in power to be interested.
Yes. Now, for example, in the field of criminal justice, Japan has long been criticized, both domestically and internally, for having the system of so-called hostage-taking criminal justice, where the police can hold you for an extended period of time without significant access to an attorney and ask you questions. And there are numerous cases of people being coerced into confessing in those circumstances. And this is sort of abetted by a judiciary which just basically seems to assume that, well, if the prosecutor has taken the trouble to prosecute you, then you must be guilty. And this is despite a constitutional prohibition on, for example, convictions based solely on confessions, various requirements that there be actual evidence. And one area where this has been a serious problem is in these cases where men are accused of groping women on trains. A woman grabs somebody's hand, says, "You groped me." The only evidence that frequently they have in these cases is the woman saying he did it. Certainly I think many of those cases the man did do it, but when there's a reasonable doubt, there's a reasonable doubt, and the criminal standard for convictions in Japan is supposedly beyond a reasonable doubt. And yet these convictions have happened and become almost a social problem, to the extent that a movie was made about them. This movie, I Just Didn't Do It, which was shown overseas. It was, I think, fairly popular in Japan, but it was about a case of a man who was accused of groping a woman on a train, and there was no evidence. He said, "I didn't do it." He was detained for months and months and months and months, and ultimately found guilty. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, just this summer, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction of a man found guilty of groping a woman on a train, which there was no real evidence other than the woman's testimony. And the Supreme Court usually doesn't do this. It's the Supreme Court usually only reviews appeals about law. There's 3 levels. There's the district court, the high court, and the appeals court. And once you get to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court is the highest level. Usually once you get to the Supreme Court will only listen to you if there's an issue of law, if there's a constitutional issue or some serious mistake in the way the appellate court applied the law. So it was quite unusual for the Supreme Court to just come down from on high and say, well, this guy was not guilty because there wasn't enough evidence. And it's impossible to know, but I would suspect that this movie was a factor. The fact that this movie brought a great deal of attention to the problem of the convictions without real evidence in these cases. So, I think that there's a number of factors at work in getting the courts to change the way they deal with these cases. The judges are human beings just like everybody else. So no matter how hard they try to just hear the facts and the evidence of the case, they're influenced by outside factors.
Yeah, we've just about covered anything. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Just that the children are always innocent in these cases, so and that's one of the things that I think is really sad, as I said, in Japan, is because the system, I think, puts a tremendous burden on the children to say things against the other parent, and the children have to live with the consequences of some of these decisions that are either expressly or implicitly enforced on them for the rest of their lives. And I think it can't be said enough that they are innocent because of their children.